This guy being the president, it's like there's a horse loose in a hospital. It's like there's a horse loose in a hospital. I think eventually everything's gonna be okay, but I have no idea what's gonna happen next. And neither do any of you, and neither do your parents, because there's a horse loose in the hospital. It's never happened before. No one knows what the horse is gonna do next, least of all the horse. He's never been in a hospital before.
President Trump brings home 5 Americans from North Korea. Israel is attacked by Iran. Israel fires back. Will there be war in the Middle East? We'll talk about all of it. I'm Ben Shapiro. This is The Ben Shapiro Show. So legitimately a ton of news breaking today. All of it very good for the President of the United States, by the way. I mean, almost universally good news for the President of the United States and good news for America, which is more important, obviously. A lot of news breaking. A lot of news breaking. And a lot of it is very good for the President of the United States. So the best piece of news for the President of the United States is that he went to the tarmac to greet a bunch of North Korean prisoners who had been released. It was 3 North Korean prisoners rather than 5. 3 North Korean prisoners who had been released. They were American citizens. And here is what it looked like when the President of the United States greeted them on the tarmac at the Joint Air Force Base in the Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland. Okay, so you can just see him greeting these guys as they get off the plane. And it is, in fact, a pretty amazing thing. Now, Trump went on, he talked to the press, he did what Trump always does, right? And it's just the best of Trump, right? So Trump gets these guys out, right? I mean, these guys are released, they come back. Trump says now that he's going to meet directly with Kim Jong-un on June 12th, so that is coming up in the very near future, and we'll have to keep an eye on that, obviously. We don't know how those negotiations are going to go, but all of these guys thanked President Trump for getting them out. Trump then proceeded to go out there and brag about the ratings that he was getting at 2 a.m., and talk about how they'd been treated excellently by the North Koreans, which, of course, is not really true. But here's the thing. I think the American public have learned to separate out the Trumpy from the good stuff that he's doing. I think that the longer Trump's presidency goes on, the less people are worried as much about the kind of crazed nature of the Trump presidency, and the more they're looking at the policy. Because right now the economy is doing very well. Instead of trading 5 terrorists for Bo Bergdahl, a traitor, instead the President of the United States traded no terrorists for 3 Americans in North Korea, and ISIS. 5 top ISIS leaders were just captured in Iraq. So President Trump tweeted on Thursday that 5 of the most wanted ISIS leaders had been captured. Spokesman for Operation Inherent Resolve, Army Colonel Ryan Dillon, tweeted on Thursday that Iraq captured 5 key ISIS leaders as part of Operation Roundup. And the tweet didn't specify when or where the 5 were captured. It didn't give any names. Dillon's tweet said the capture was a coordinated operation between Iraqi and U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces. So those would be the same people who are helping fight Assad. Iraq captures 5 key Daesh leaders. Daesh is the Arabic name for ISIS. During Operation Roundup, the arrest is a significant blow to Daesh and demonstrates close coordination between ISF, SDF in their fight to defeat Daesh. And then they say that the joint force is committed to lasting defeat of Daesh and setting conditions for stabilization. Okay, so all of this is very, very good news for President Trump. All he has to do, apparently, is just ignore everything Obama would have done and everything goes swimmingly. So all of that is excellent news for the President of the United States, who, again, instead of trading 5 terrorists for a traitor, just captured 5 terrorists along with the Iraqis and the Syrians and freed 3 Americans. So well done, President Trump. Meanwhile, the president is doing the right thing in the Middle East as well. Iran had attacked Israel with a bunch of missiles, a bunch of rockets from Syria into the Golan Heights. The Golan Heights is a portion of Israel that was captured originally from Syria during the 1973 war, I believe, was the Golan Heights. The Golan Heights, I think the 73 war. The Golan Heights is a very strong strategic point in Israel. It's a section of Israel that is elevated by about 300 feet up almost a straight cliff that overlooks Israel. When Syria owned it, Syria used to use it as a staging point for attacks. Israel owns it now, and Syria has been very upset about that ever since. Well, the Syrian government, which is working in cahoots with the Iranians, they fired a bunch of rockets to the Golan Heights. Israel has this amazing defense system, this amazing rocket defense system. They shot down all 20 of them, and then Israel proceeded to pound the living crap out of a bunch of Syrian targets that had Iranians on them. So Israel's intelligence is good enough that Israel knows where Iran is stationing its people in Syria, and Israel went in and killed, I believe, 28 Iranians who were members of the Iranian military in Syria. They're pounding Syria, and what they said, and I love this line, they said, if it rains in Israel, it will pour in Iran, meaning you try anything and we will make you bleed. And it's an amazing thing because all of the people who've been victimized by the Assad regime in Syria, apparently there were reports that they were cheering as Israeli warplanes, as Jewish warplanes were flying into Syria. A bunch of Muslims were cheering that Israel was coming in, which is not a shock because, again, the enemy of my enemy is my friend in the Middle East. And right now it is very obvious who the friends are, right? Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Jordan, Israel. They're all on one side against the Iranians. And as I've been saying for a long time here, the reality is that the only thing that Obama's Iran deal achieved was the creation of this alliance. So in a weird way, Obama actually facilitated the creation of an anti-Iranian alliance that is very powerful and I think is going to hold up for a long time. I think that's really good. That's actually a really good thing that happened unintentionally because Obama never did anything great intentionally. He did something really great unintentionally. By strengthening Iran, he forced all of these other countries to jump in the sack with Israel, and now all of them are allied against the Iranian power. That's a really good thing. The UAE said that it was good that Israel had struck these Iranian targets last night. They said Israel has a right to defend itself. The United Arab Emirates said that the Jewish state, which I'm not even sure that they formally recognize, has a right to defend itself. The Saudis said the same thing. And it's an amazing, amazing thing. And the Trump administration said all the right things as well. Unlike the Obama administration, which always called for restraint whenever Israel was attacked, the Trump administration said, listen, you get hit, you do what you want, right? Israel has every right to defend itself. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to the Trump administration for saying the right thing. So here's the story from the UK Sun. Israel has blasted Iran's bases in Syria with 70 missiles, killing at least 23 fighters in revenge for rocket strikes on the Golan Heights. Fighter jets bombarded military bases, munitions warehouse, and intelligence centers after Tel Aviv stoked fears of a war by warning if it rains in Israel, it will pour in Iran. I'm sorry, I love the British media coverage there, that Israel stoked fears of a war. Israel didn't initiate the conflict. Israel was attacked by rockets, and then Israel threatened in response that if you keep firing missiles at us, we're going to kick your ass. That's fine. That's good. That's not Israel threatening a war. That's Iran threatening a war, and Israel saying, if you start it, we will finish it. Which, by the way, is exactly what you should teach your children when it comes to fights. Never start a fight, but if you get in a fight, finish the fight. The strikes hit nearly every target and were a response to 20 rockets fired by the Iranian Quds Force, Israeli military chiefs claimed. 5 Syrian soldiers, including 2 officers, and 18 militia fighters were killed in the attack, according to the Britain-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. The death toll is likely to rise because some of the wounded are in critical condition. As I said, I believe that the actual number is about 28 at this point. The conflict came hours after President Trump pulled out of the nuke deal with Iran. Now, one of the things that's amazing about all of this is that the entire left is now blaming Trump for Iran attacking Israel. They're suggesting that it's Trump's pullout from the Iran deal that emboldens the Iranians to pursue nuclear weapons. This is the essence of stupidity. It is such a bad argument. The argument, I guess, is that Iran was moderating. They were doing fine. They were moderating. And then Trump came along. And he did something super duper terrible. He pulled out of this Iran deal. And now everything has gone to hell in a handbasket. Now look at what he's done. He's created a war in the Middle East because he pulled out of the Iran deal. And the reality is that the Iran deal was going to end with Iran having nuclear weapons. It was never designed to prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons. It was designed to kick the can down the road to ensure that the next president would have to own anything that went wrong in Iran. That's where all of this was going. And here's the proof. Okay, there is no nuclear deal that has ever been cut with an extremist group to remove them of nuclear weapons. Never in history with bribery. It doesn't work that way. There are very few nations in the history of the world that have actually had nuclear weapons and then given up the nuclear weapons, or been developing a nuclear program and then stopped developing the nuclear program. You can actually list them on slightly more than one hand, right? Ukraine had nuclear weapons, but those were left over from the USSR. Kazakhstan had nuclear weapons. Those were left over from the USSR. Belarus had nuclear weapons. Those were left over from the USSR. The United States came in and said, listen, you guys don't have the capacity to take care of your nuclear weapons or secure your nuclear weapons, so you should give those up, and in return, we'll give you security guarantees. That's worked out pretty well up until Obama, who allowed Russia to invade Ukraine and annex Crimea. The only 2 nations that actually developed nuclear weapons or were in the process of developing nuclear weapons and gave them up were South Africa in 1993 and Libya in 2003. Right? Those are the only 2 nations that had active nuclear programs who gave up their nuclear weapons and just said no. Okay, and the reasons they gave up those nuclear weapons were not because the United States came to them and said, we will bribe you to give up your nuclear weapons. The reason they gave up their nuclear weapons is that those countries preemptively gave up their nuclear weapons, knowing that there would be consequences if they did not. In other words, the countries themselves moderated. So South Africa in 1993, under F.W. de Klerk, right, he came forward and he said, listen, we have 6 nuclear weapons. Those 6 nuclear weapons, we just gave those up. And we had those that were created in the 1970s and the 1980s as a counterbalance to USSR influence in Africa. We don't need those anymore. And in order to demonstrate to the world that we are intent on being peaceful, I'm going to give up those nuclear weapons right now, right? In expectation that the world would then treat them better, right? It was an investment by South Africa in their own future. The same thing happened with Muammar Gaddafi. Now, it turns out the Obama administration proceeded to take him out anyway, which was the wrong move, as I said at the time. Okay, the Gaddafi in 2003 apparently got a letter from George W. Bush, and the letter said, "Give up your nukes or we're coming after you." And Gaddafi said, "All right, sounds good." He saw that the United States was about to go into Iraq, and before the United States went into Iraq, he gave up his nuclear weapons because he figured, I don't want to go to war with these people. I want to be seen as moderate, and so I'm going to preemptively give up my nuclear weapons. Hey, this is the reality. If Iran wanted to give up its nukes, if Iran wanted an open economy, you know how they could do that? You know how they could have a peaceful exchange with the rest of the world? They could just stop their nuclear program now without any deal. They could just say, listen, we've destroyed all of our nuclear facilities. We're done. Now open up. Rest of the world, help us out. And you know what would happen? Everything would be hunky-dory. But they have no intention of doing that. And I have the proof for you in just a second. First, here is the proof that Iran has no intention of giving up its nuclear program or its nuclear weapons. Again, all they would have to do is just give it up. There doesn't have to be a deal. If they want to be part of the family of nations, all they have to do is stop funding terrorism all over the world. But they're not going to do that. They're not interested in doing that. They forcibly oppose doing that. Since the Iran deal kicked in 2015, in the last 3 years, Iran has increased its military spending 40%. Their economy has been garbage, by the way. Every dollar they got from us, every dollar we released to them was used to fund terrorism or used in the military, essentially. And their economy has been terrible, which is why what you're actually seeing is a rolling set of protests across Iran that has been ongoing now for legitimately months. Okay, these are protests not even about the Islamic nature of the republic, but about the inability of the government to allow a free market economy and integrate into the world economy enough so that people aren't struggling. And these are basic bread and butter riots that are happening in Iran. Now, how does all of this get solved? In the end, the truth is the only thing that's going to solve the Iranian problem is going to be a regime change. That regime change does not necessarily have to be pushed by the outside. It doesn't have to be a situation where the United States comes in and topples the Iranian mullahs, right? We don't have to go to war with Iran in order to effectuate this. There are groups within Iran that we ought to be fostering. And beyond that, I'm sure that we could probably find a general inside the Iranian Revolutionary Guard who would be willing to overthrow the Shahs, overthrow the mullahs, rather. And that's probably what's going to happen here, because realistically speaking, the Iranian military was purged of all of its moderates years and years and years ago. And if there were to be some sort of uprising, the Iranian military would just, as the tool of the mullahs, start shooting people in the streets. So what you really need is an interior military coup by someone who figures that the mullahs are going to get us all killed, and we need to get rid of those mullahs, and we need to install a puppet dictatorship, basically. Right? The same way that it happened in Egypt. Right? In Egypt, there was the revolution in Egypt, and Mubarak was replaced with Mohammed Morsi, who was a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, and then that degraded back into essentially a benevolent dictatorship under al-Sisi, who's been an ally to the West, and is very much like Mubarak, except more so. Right? He's openly allied with Israel at this point, who's been very warm toward the United States. Barack Obama tried actively to alienate him because he thought for some reason that the Iranians were going to be better allies than the Egyptians, which is just insane. But it is very obvious at this point that Iran has no interest in anything beyond war. Now, is there really going to be a large-scale war between Israel and Iran? I'll discuss that in just a second. I do not think there will be. I don't think there's going to be a large-scale war between Israel and Iran. The reason I don't think there's going to be a large-scale war between Israel and Iran is because I think Iran would be unbelievably foolish to pursue this. If Iran does this, Israel will wipe them off the map. Okay, Israel, using Saudi airspace in an alliance with the Egyptians and the Jordanians, will take out their facilities and topple the regime. Okay, the Israelis do have the capacity to decapitate the regime. The question is whether Israel wants to incur the casualties that will happen as a result of that, because Iran obviously does have ballistic weapons technology. Iran does have terrorist groups all surrounding Israel, Hezbollah to Israel's north, Hamas to Israel's south, and Syria to Israel's sort of northeast. You know, the fact is that Israel, if it had to fight a war, would win a war, but it would be a bloody war. It could draw in countries like Turkey to try and save the Iranians, which would be weird because Turkey really hates Iran. But as a counterbalance to Israel, they might do it. Bottom line here is I do not think that Iran wants to risk it. I think what Iran wants to do is fire off a few missiles, demonstrate that they have not been shut down in any serious way, and then Israel responds by saying, listen, you do that and we will finish you. We will finish you. Because here's the truth of it. Everybody knows that if things really get bad, if Iran launches a full-scale war and it's Iran versus Saudi Arabia and Israel and Egypt, that the United States Air Force alone would do unbelievable damage to the Iranian military. So I don't want Iran going to war. I don't want Israel going to war. I don't want the United States going to war. But if there is going to be a war between Israel and Iran, I know that Israel knows that they've got to do it now. They can't wait until Iran has a nuclear weapon because that changes the dynamics on the ground. Beyond that, there are other measures that can be taken, including a reinstitution of sanctions that can do serious damage to the regime. Trump has now warned Iran. He says, do not restart your nuclear weapons program. He said, I would advise Iran not to start their nuclear program. I would advise them very strongly. If they do, there will be very severe consequences. The president spoke the day after the American withdrawal from the Iran deal and the reimposition of U.S. sanctions on Tehran. And then Trump said, Iran will come back and say, we don't want to negotiate. And of course they're going to say that. And if I were in their position, I'd say that too for the first couple of months. We're not going to negotiate. But they'll negotiate, or something will happen. And hopefully that won't be the case. You know, I think that a lot of the success that Trump is seeing on the foreign policy front is pretty simple and pretty interesting. So Trump has a perspective on the world. Trump's perspective on the world is that every interaction is a win-lose interaction. That in every interaction there is a winner and there is a loser. It is a zero-sum game. There's never a win-win situation. So in economics and trade, there are people who win and there are people who lose. Now, he's wrong about that on trade. But on foreign policy, he is not wrong. Okay, the reality is that there are very few win-win situations in foreign policy. Usually there is a winner and usually there is a loser. Barack Obama didn't believe that. He believed in the family of nations, and it's a cooperative thing, and if we all get together and we get in a room and we talk about it, we'll put all of our differences aside and we'll move forward. That's really not the way that international relations work. The way international relations work is that nations have interests. Where they have commonality of interest, they ally. Where they do not have commonality of interest, they conflict. It's really that simple. And Trump gets that. Trump gets that better than Obama ever did. Trump understands that when Iran gains power, that means that Saudi Arabia has lost power. He understands that when Iran increases its regional influence, it means that Israel is endangered. He understands that when North Korea increases its power, then that means that South Korea is losing its power, and by extension, the United States is losing power in an ally. Trump gets that far better than Obama ever did. Obama had this very complex realpolitik view of the world, but his realpolitik was not realistic. It was not real, and it was not politics. It was actually just a view of the world that was rosy in the extreme. Well, perhaps our behavior can change Iran. You know, like the abused girlfriend who keeps going back to the boyfriend thinking she's going to change him. That's how Obama was with Iran. Well, if we go back, maybe they will moderate, and they can be a moderate influence on the region. I mean, look at the history of Iran. Look at how Iran was actually one of the great forebears of civilization. All of that's true, but it ain't true now, and hadn't been true since 1979. And the fact that Barack Obama was willing to forward the ambitions of the mullahs in order to pursue his utopian vision of a counterbalance to Israel in the Middle East in the presence of Iran, not only was it idiotic, it actually ended up doing severe damage and killing a lot of people. So, you know, good for President Trump for driving against that. And again, there's a reason that he's winning all of these victories. I hope that he takes that same perspective to negotiations with North Korea. I hope that he does not, I hope that he's not soothed by North Korean assurances. I hope that he requires actual hard evidence that they are going to disarm. If he does that, you got to give the man unbelievable credit. You got to give him a lot of credit. I'm giving him credit right now for freeing the North Korean prisoners. I'm the prisoners of North Korea. I'm giving him credit for pulling out of the Iran deal. Again, I think the strongest part of Trump's presidency has been on policy, obviously. The weakest part has been a lot of the personal scandal. And in just a second, I want to talk about the personal scandal and whether it influences President Trump in any serious way. I have my doubts that it influences Trump in any real way. Okay, now, I want to discuss for just a few minutes here how conservatives can reach out to young people, because I have an article that's a cover story in the Weekly Standard, it's a long essay about the generational gap between young conservatives and older conservatives in America. And I think we're sort of uniquely qualified to talk about this issue because we have a lot of young people who listen to this program. We also have a lot of folks who are older Republicans who listen to this program, older Americans who listen to this program. There is a major generation gap inside the Republican Party, and it largely breaks down on a couple of issues. One issue is social issues, and by that I mean largely same-sex marriage and drug legalization, and the other is character issues. So these generation gaps, I think, can be bridged, but I think that we have to understand what they are. So the first issue is this libertarian approach to same-sex marriage and drug legalization. So younger Americans look at the government and they say the government stinks at everything. Not only does the government stink at everything, I think the government ought to leave me alone. In fact, I think the government ought to leave everybody alone. So when it comes to same-sex marriage, even if I personally believe in traditional marriage, that doesn't mean that the government has a role in any of this stuff. I think older conservatives can get with that. I think older conservatives can understand that. I think they can sympathize. The drug legalization issue, it seems to come from the same place. It's not that young people are all drugged up and doped up. It's that they don't want the government in their business. And I think there are a lot of conservatives who believe that too. I think the policy issues are actually rather easy to bridge for conservatives. I think that the character issue is a different issue. And here there is a serious gap. And the gap happens to be over President Trump. So young conservatives do not like President Trump. Older conservatives love President Trump. Okay, they love him. So here are the polls. Okay, the polls show that younger Americans are moving dramatically away from the Republican Party. But one of the reasons for that is because of President Trump. An incredible 82% of Republican and Republican-leaning voters between the ages of 18 and 24 say they want another Republican to challenge President Trump for the party's nomination in 2020. Older Americans hear this, they say young Americans are idiots. And younger Americans hear that, and they say older Americans are fine with all the terrible things that Trump is doing. Hey, here's the reality. They just have two different frames. Young conservatives look at Trump and they say that he has bad values. Okay, they say that he is not a person who treats women well. They don't like what he said about Charlottesville. He's crude about a lot of things. Young conservatives are more likely to see Trump as an obstacle to their ability to speak to people their own age. Okay, older conservatives judge Trump on his politics, and younger conservatives judge Trump on his values. So older conservatives love Trump because they say, look at all the great stuff he's doing. And they're right. And younger conservatives judge Trump on who he is as a person. They say, look at all the terrible things he's said and done. And they're not completely wrong. So why do these two groups view the issue from opposite sides? Why do they use opposite lenses? Well, older conservatives remember fighting the Bill Clinton wars, and they carry the scars from that. They remember arguing that Clinton was unfit for office based on his treatment of women and his perjury, and they remember losing that argument to the left. They remember arguing that character counts and watching as Democrats held aloft the banner of Teddy Kennedy, right, who was creating waitress sandwiches with Chris Dodd when he wasn't drowning women in rivers. Right? Older conservatives remember Mitt Romney, and they remember how he got just slandered and destroyed while he was the cleanest guy in the room. And so they were looking for a hammer. Younger conservatives, they think that the character question is still up for debate. Older conservatives say the character question is over. We lost. Let's get a guy in there who does what we want. Younger conservatives think that the character question is still unfolding. And they're not wrong. It is unfolding, but for only for younger Americans. Right? If you're older, you already made up your mind on this. If you're young, then you want to be able to say to your friends, I'm a good person, and the person I voted for is a good person. Because you're still making up your mind on what character means. Right? Trump presents a serious problem for a lot of young conservatives who are trying to make the character argument in favor of the Republican Party. When you're young, you decide how you're going to vote based on character. As you get older, I think you start to vote more based on policy than character. Young conservatives didn't see the battle of 2016 as a battle in which character had already lost. They saw it as presenting a question about their own character. Were they willing to enthusiastically back a guy that they thought was a problem? And the answer, by and large, was no for young conservatives. Okay, so that's a serious gap. But again, I think that gap can be bridged. The way that gap is bridged is by older conservatives telling younger conservatives, listen, it's not that we think that Trump is amazing in terms of his personal character. We don't think that he's a God king or anything. We just like what he's doing. And you can have both. You can have both. A guy who is not a character that you particularly think is great and some really amazing policy. That's what older conservatives can teach younger conservatives. And what younger conservatives can teach older conservatives is you don't have to go along with everything bad that Trump does in order to say that his policies are quite good. And if they can come to that sort of conciliation, I think that will at least solidify the party, solidify the conservative movement in a fairly significant way. Alrighty, time for some things I like and then some things that I hate. So, things I like. If you haven't seen it, John Mulaney is a very funny comic. So he had a show on Fox that was really not good. Like, it's a really, really bad show. But then he has a comedy special on Netflix. His stand-up, I think, is really good. It's pretty clean. I would say, like, if he got rid of the cursing, it would be virtually 100% clean. There's like one joke in this whole thing that's really super dirty, but it's really not. It's not a particularly dirty performance. He gets political a little bit near the end of this. It's John Mulaney's Kid Gorgeous at Radio City. He's very, very talented. It's really funny. The first 40 minutes of this are really great. Once he gets to politics, it starts to go off the rails because he can't help himself. He starts off, with some jokes about President Trump that are fairly innocuous and kind of funny. And then he jumps into, President Obama was just the greatest. And you're like, oh, come on. You didn't have to go here. But overall, very, very funny guy. So worth watching. Do we have a little bit of the preview of him? Okay.
This guy being the president, it's like there's a horse loose in a hospital. It's like there's a horse loose in a hospital. I think eventually everything's gonna be okay, but I have no idea what's gonna happen next. And neither do any of you, and neither do your parents, because there's a horse loose in the hospital. It's never happened before. No one knows what the horse is gonna do next, least of all the horse. He's never been in a hospital before.
Okay, so again, this is the innocuous part, and then he gets to the part where he sort of rips into Trump, but more by praising Obama, and of course suggests that anyone who allowed Trump into office is a rube and all this kind of stuff. That's the part that's annoying. So if this annoys you, don't watch the last 20 minutes of the special. The first 40 minutes of the special, though, is really, really funny. Okay, other things that I like. Jason Whitlock, who partners with Colin Cowherd on a show on Fox Sports 1, talking about, obviously, the sporting events of the day. Jason is, I think, a different thinker. We're going to try and get him on our Sunday show, I think. And Jason says that one of the big problems that's happening in our culture right now, particularly for black folks, is that if you say that Trump is a good idea, then you just get kicked out. He's talking about Kanye West with Tucker Carlson.
But if you just say, you know what, I think Trump has a good idea here, you get kicked out of the black race. Kanye's saying, I don't agree with everything Trump believes in. Kanye, disagrees with Trump and the Republican Party and conservatives on a lot of issues, but he's not willing to cast someone out of the human race just because he disagrees with them.
Okay, so Whitlock has said a lot of this sort of stuff, and for that, he has been excised from large segments of the black community. Again, I think that what we're seeing right now, there's an amazing tweet. I have to get this tweet for you. It's so good. So Kanye West tweeted out that he tweeted something else out about freedom of thought. Great. You know, I love when Kanye West tweets that kind of stuff because I like freedom of thought whenever anybody talks about it. And Perez Hilton tweeted back, Kanye is enslaved to freedom of thought. Okay, that is what Perez Hilton tweeted that back, not Perez. Okay, that I think is the problem right there. You may be missing the point. If you think that freedom of thought is the new slavery, or as Ta-Nehisi Coates put it, that freedom of thought is the new sort of, that freedom of thought is just a form of white freedom, right? That you're free to be white, then we can't have a conversation, okay? There's no conversation to be had. You're just a tribal enthusiast, and there's nothing else to be said about it. Okay, we'll be back here tomorrow with all the latest. I'm Ben Shapiro. This is The Ben Shapiro Show.